Hey, it's Dr. Lindsay with Ed of the Human. I want to talk today a little bit about the COVID-19 virus and get a little bit of the immunology that's going on with this virus to help you understand why people are comparing it to flu and cold, why it's different from other coronaviruses, and hopefully give you a little bit better idea of what we're dealing with here. So the first thing we did is I draw my little virus particle up here. This is magnified. And so the first thing that makes it really unique is that all virus particles have to have something called a spike protein or an S protein in order to get into another cell. This spike protein interacts with receptors, and so we've drawn that here. This is our spike protein. And so with COVID, this one's unique because it interacts with our ACE2 receptors. That's completely different from the flu virus, which interacts with a different receptor type called sialic acid. And so all of our drugs that we have are antivirals for flu. They work on that receptor site to block the virus from entering the cell that way. So that's why none of our drugs for flu work for coronavirus, because it's a completely different entry mechanism. And so what happens with the spike protein is this little bacteria or the little virus goes, it hits this here, and then it has to use the second thing called this furin cleavage site. Most cells express furin, and so it can break into the cell and cleave off the receptors and get in and fuse with the cell to put its little viral particles into the cell. And so no other coronaviruses, so the flu doesn't have this, and that's one of the things that makes COVID-19 so infectious, is that it has the ability to much more easily get into the cells. SARS, the first time around, didn't have that ability, and that's why it wasn't nearly as infectious. And so then once that virus particle cleaves off these receptors, it binds with the spike protein, is able to get and inject the DNA into the cell. Once it's in the cell, it goes to something called the inflammasome. And then inflammasome is kind of a newer term, and it's just the collection of all of the different receptors and genes and particles that are involved in creating inflammation in the cell and then ultimately in the body. And so this particular inflammasome is called MLRP3, and that's kind of what the COVID virus works on. And so once that inflammasome is turned on, that is what drives a lot of your symptoms in the body, and having the aches and the pains and the fever. That's all driven by your own cells that are being turned on by that virus. And so there's been some talk about something called a cytokine storm, and that is basically when this process is out of control and you're just pumping out all those inflammatory processes in an uncontrolled way. And that's caused by the virus. It's not caused by drugs. It's not caused by any natural things that you do. And the main one involved here is called this IL-1 beta or interleukin-1 beta. And so that means that if we want to calm down this process, there's a few things we can do. And so really there's no research on anything for the coronavirus or the COVID-19 because it's brand new. Now we do have research on prior coronavirus types, but not this particular strain. And we also know that there's some things that work on some of the mechanisms. There is prior research before the COVID-19 outbreak on things that work for the MLRP3. And so I wrote those over here for you. So with the inflammasome, vitamin C can prevent that ramp up, which makes a lot of sense. We know vitamin C is an anti-inflammatory. Melatonin, there is a correlation between your melatonin levels and your inflammation levels. That's inversely related. So the more melatonin you have, the less inflammation you have. This may be why we see less severity in kids, is because they naturally have less inflammation, they have higher melatonin levels. That is not to say that if you take melatonin, it will decrease your symptoms. There's just a correlation there, but we don't know how strong of a correlation it is. Another big one is rosmarinic acid, and so that's actually a very commonly found plant compound. You can find it in things like rosemary, which is where it got its name, but it's in a lot of your mint family herbs as well, and things like lemon balm. And so that can be a really good one. It's also in cannabis, so that's a fun fact. IL-6 is one of the main interleukins that drives a lot of the inflammation and a lot of the symptoms. And so doing things to decrease that, the number one is lowering stress. We know that high stress levels decrease your ability to mount an appropriate immune response. And so even doing something as simple as a visualization, so closing your eyes for 5 seconds and picturing yourself at your happy place, be it the beach or the golf course or on a mountaintop, that can be very effective for lowering IL-6. At that very moment, your body's very responsive. There's also a lot of herbs, and a lot of these are going to be ones that work on some of the more of the anxiety and the stress level. So lemon balm, passion flower, feverfew. This might actually be the main way that feverfew works to reduce fever levels, is on that inflammasome. And then ashwagandha is another one. So The one thing I didn't mention that I did want to, going back to your ACE2 receptors, these are really important because this is why you're seeing the symptoms you see. So predominantly lung, because you have ACE receptors there, but you also have them on all your blood vessels, in your kidneys, the testes, and the GI tract as well. And so there have been new reports of you can get diarrhea from the coronavirus. Now you know why. It's based on where those receptors are found. But you can still see very atypical symptoms as well. The virus is not just limited to these cell types. Because it has that furin cleavage site, it's able to get into almost any cell in the body, and so it can get to even the central nervous system. And so keep in mind that you may not have typical symptoms of a cough and a sore throat and a fever, but you may still be experiencing coronavirus. So I guess it's best to isolate yourself, always. So that's what I got for you guys today. If you have any comments, please leave questions, comments below. We're going to be following up with this, I think, as we learn more.